Welcome to Movie Friends. My name is Seth. At some point when you're a kid, people ask you what you want to be. Then, a little bit later, you're actually supposed to pick something. For a lot of folks, this works. For others, choosing one thing isn't a path, it's more like a cell. My guest today is Melissa D'Agostino. She's a Canadian actress, writer, and filmmaker who, along with her husband Matt, run Highball TV, a Canadian VOD service. She's the director of Mother of All Shows. It's a surreal exploration of relational trauma, child-to-parent relationship, and of course, variety shows. Melissa told me about her life, how she got into show business, about making the movie, and we talked about how living in two worlds isn't only a good skill to have, it's necessary to navigate the strange world of art and business that we find ourselves in currently. This is my interview with Melissa D'Agostino. I hope you enjoy it. Where are you at now? You in Toronto?
I'm not actually. We recently bought a farm 2 hours outside of Toronto, so we split our time between the farm and the city because we still have an office in the city. Yeah, so it's pretty great.
Very cool. Very cool. Wow, you're living the Toronto dream of not living in the city.
It's true. It's sadly, yes. I lived in Toronto for almost 20 years and I loved it. And then there just came a time when we're interested in building a little film studio out here too. So we thought, let's buy a place with some land and a place where we can go and edit and write and not be in the city. And it's worked out really well.
Were you born in Toronto?
I was born just outside of Toronto in a suburb called Woodbridge, Ontario, named after a wooden bridge, obviously. And I grew up around, very creative name.
That's an amazing line. Wow. You need to put that in the back of your mind, because if you don't, I'm going to. The character needs to come in and say, I'm from Stone Ridge, Massachusetts, named after a Stone Ridge.
Any simpler. I probably will make it into.
Yeah.
I'm writing a bunch of movies about where I grew up, so I have a screenplay already about it. So there's a lot of jokes about that place. I grew up around about 85% of the people there were Italian Canadian. They were all immigrants who moved to Toronto when in the 60s and then moved on up to the suburbs. So yeah, that's where I spent my formative years.
So were you interested in the performing arts as a youngster? Was there a lot of stuff going on in Stonebridge?
In Woodbridge? No, there wasn't.
Yeah, Woodbridge, sorry.
Yeah, it's okay. The Stonebridge is also fascinating and probably more interesting than Woodbridge, but I don't know. Anyway, we won't get into the semantics. I interested in performing immediately. Yeah, from since I can remember. There wasn't a lot going on in the sense that there weren't theaters really in Woodbridge. I always joke that we come from the birthplace of the Renaissance, and then my family, we all moved to Canada, and then we built strip malls because basically every time I would come home from college, my dad would drive me home from the train station, and there was a new strip mall, and it was there wasn't a lot of investment in building the arts in Woodbridge where I grew up, but there were a lot of lessons. There were music schools and dance schools, and there were places to send your kids. And luckily, my parents had the means and were able to send me to those lessons. And so I got to explore that. But really, you had to go to Toronto to find theater and museums and art for the most part.
Right. So how did you start out then?
As a really little kid, I started out dancing first and playing the piano.
Yeah.
Those were the two things that my mom wanted me to, as a 3-year-old or 5-year-old was these will help you be a more well-rounded person and cultured. And so I got to go do those things. And my sister, who is almost a decade older than me, had also done those things. So I started doing that and then started asking for singing lessons. And it just sort of grew from there. I wanted to be, at first, a theater performer because that felt like the more accessible thing. My parents took me to see Les
Yeah.
Miserables, and I became obsessed with that musical, which like
Yeah.
most kids of my generation did. It was like huge spectacle.
Yeah. How old were you when you saw that?
I think I was 9, if I recall.
Oh my
9.
gosh. Yeah, that would rewire your brain.
Yeah. It's like that barricade comes together and it's pretty magical. I actually I had that feeling again for the first time in a long time. I went to see some Broadway shows last month, and there's a transition in Hades Town. The stage shifts, and the transition was so powerful. Like, it was so emotional. And I was like, oh, this is like that feeling I had
Mm,
when those barricades came together. I knew every word of the
mm.
score when I went. My sister had the CDs, and so I would listen to them while I did chores, like around the house, and sing them at the top of my lungs. So I knew all the words. I don't think I sang. Like, I think I kept my mouth shut. I don't think I was like one of those
Yeah.
kids who started singing, thankfully. But I loved it.
So you're doing singing, piano, dancing, you're falling in love with Les Mis. Is your family also interested in films? Are you interested in films? Are you thinking along those lines?
Yeah, I mean, I loved films growing up, especially MGM musicals. I was really obsessed with MGM musicals.
Sure.
I would get I had the VHSs for all the That's Entertainment movies, every Gene Kelly movie.
Oh
Um,
yeah.
yeah, I watched The Wizard of Oz when I would get home from school pretty much every day. That and Alice in Wonderland were like my first real, like, I would watch them over and over again. And so I was very interested in films.
Hmm.
My family was too. I don't recall going to the movies a lot with my family. My dad and I would go to the movies sometimes, and my sister and I, and
Hmm.
then my friends and I, like, so, but we didn't do a lot of like family going, or my cousins and I. Like, I'm Italian, so I had a huge extended family of like 50
Sure.
cousins. So like at any time you were sort of like in a group. And like I remember going to see Ghostbusters 2 with, a bunch of my cousins and stuff like that, where, you would just sort of end up at the movies. I remember seeing there was a Chipmunk movie with the Chipettes, and I went to see it with my cousin Paul.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Yeah,
Traveling around the world in hot air balloons.
that's right. That's right. That left a
Yeah.
huge impression on me. I loved the Chipmunks. I mean, any cartoon that sang, or the Mini Pops, the Chipmunks, the Muppets, like any time
Mm.
something was geared toward being musical, then I was obviously obsessed. So my family, we watched a lot of movies at home. We rented movies all the time. We'd go to
Hmm.
Blockbuster all the time. And there was an independent movie rental place in the strip mall around the corner. And so we would go, and it was one of those ones where you'd like take the little Velcroed number off the wall and bring it to the person. And, it's like very small. And I remember renting Dirty Dancing there finally. At first, I wasn't allowed to watch Dirty Dancing. And then when I finally could, my mom was like, all right. And then obsessed.
Yes. Amazing film. I did not watch it for far too long. I didn't watch it until maybe 2 years ago.
Oh, wow.
And yeah, I think, for me growing up, we were heavily into like punk music and weird art and weird movies, right? So I would see a movie like Dirty Dancing or even, The Godfather, or movies that were presented to you as like, this is a big, important movie. And I would just turn my nose up at it and be like, well, I want to have nothing to do with that.
Right.
So as an
Counterculture.
adult, I heard someone call it one time the young and angry phase. So as an adult, I'm playing a lot of catch up on amazing, like life-changing, beautiful stuff. And Dirty Dancing was one that I put on and I was like, all right, let's see how this goes. And I was just totally, totally blown away by it.
Yeah. Have you watched the Movies That Made Us show on Netflix, and they do a whole episode about Dirty Dancing? It's wonderful.
I haven't. I heard that they did one on that. So I still got to check it out.
The
My
show is
favorite thing
kind of
was like this.
challenging because it's a lot of like reality TV style, but the anecdotes are great.
Sure.
Yeah.
I just love that we take a story that is so firmly placed in one time period, and I'm far from the first person to ever comment on this. And then we end the movie with a song written in like 1987 and no one cares. Nobody mentions, and it works. Like, it works and it's done so well. I
I
love it.
know.
It's incredible.
Yeah, it's great. And sometimes I think, there is that thing about how they'll write a new song because they want to be nominated for an Oscar, right? Like in the Les Mis, speaking of Les Mis,
Yeah.
when they did the film version and then they wrote that song, very extraneous song where you're like, guys, you didn't need this song. But they wanted that Oscar
Right.
nom, right? But I think with Dirty Dancing, it was just like, and the way they tell it in that program is they only had so much money to license things anyway, and that soundtrack is so expensive. I mean, if you had to pay top dollar for those songs, it's so expensive. But that track is a classic now.
Oh, absolutely. One of the greatest of all time.
Mm-hmm.
How did you start acting? What was the first time, or did you go to school? Were you like, this is what I'm going to do? And your large Italian family was like, sure.
Well, they weren't so much sure. But they were supportive enough, it was like they were supportive enough that I got the opportunities to go study and do things, which I'm very grateful for. I started putting on shows when I was a kid in my basement with my cousins, and we would make fake like little tickets and sell concessions, like Dirty Dancing. We like put on a whole Dirty Dancing number in my backyard that summer, and I was always doing that. And then when I was a teenager, I was studying, and then I was in Catholic school for 2 years in Woodbridge, and I really didn't like it, and I really wanted to study art more and to get out of that neighborhood. I was just really not enchanted with the suburbs. I mean, this is a lot of people's story, but I wanted to expand. And my friend had gotten into an art school. And so in grade 10 or in the 10th grade, I auditioned, and I got into the music part of this fame school, if you will. Another seminal film in my film watching.
Sure.
And also in the 80s, there's the TV show. So you were sort of surrounded by fame all the time, which was great. So I got to go to this school, and I would take a bus for like an hour and a half every morning to get to this art school. And it was attached to a theater that I grew up dancing in this other suburb. It was the best, it was music class, and I wanted to be in the musical the year that I got there, but they had already had auditions the year before, so I couldn't be in the musical, but they needed a choreographer, and I had started a dance company with my friends, and I was a junior member of a dance company that my dance teacher ran. So I was like, I could choreograph the musical because I just wanted to be a part of it, and I loved Bob Fosse. At this point, I was fully obsessed with Bob Fosse, and so I was like, this is what I want to do. I'm going to be a choreographer. I'm going to make movies, and so I got to choreograph Working the Musical, which is a really cool musical written in the 70s based on the book by Studs Terkel about people and their jobs, with music by James Taylor, and like just it's a wild musical. Yeah, so I got to choreograph that, and then I started doing more choreography there, and my dance company would do like local gigs in Woodbridge, and I just always wanted to make things. Like for me, it was always really exciting to be a part of all the stages of making a thing. I was always less interested in just joining a project as an actor or a singer or a dancer. I did that, and sometimes that can be very fun. But even as a teenager, I was like, it's way more exciting when I have control over some of these elements and I can build the thing.
Yeah.
So, but at that point, I was performing on stage all the time, depending on whether it was in my high school or in my individual classes. And then I auditioned to go to school for musical theater. And there was one program in Canada. There used to be, there isn't anymore, but there was one college program at the University of Windsor for musical theater. There's there's a like college program at Sheridan College, but there was only one university. Like you could only get a degree for specifically musical theater in one place, which is wild.
Wow.
Yeah, like you
Okay.
could get a theater degree at a bunch of different universities,
Yeah.
but if you wanted to study musical theater. So that was sort of my ticket because there was a lot of pressure from my family to get a degree. And I was really interested in getting a degree and going to a university. And I also wanted to get out of my house, my family house, which was a very tense place to be. And I needed a break from it. And so this place was 4 hours away, Windsor, on the border of Canada and the US, right across from Detroit. And I got in and I went, and then I did 4 years there of music theater. And then eventually, ironically, I switched from studying musical theater to acting because I felt like I wanted more training as an actor, and the musical theater degree in the last 2 years was much less focused on acting. So I switched.
Wow.
Yeah, it's a great program.
So as a young person, you're putting things on, you go initially not for acting, but it's all kind of wrapped up in there. And you mentioned that you liked not just joining something, but being part of something and helping like make all the decisions. And at what point did you decide?
When did I decide to be in charge of everyone? Is that what you're going to ask me?
No. We're older, right? And when you're young, you can kind of feel like you need to pick a lane, you know? And so did you feel like, okay, I am going to have success in this thing, or my passion is actually in acting, or did you see like a way forward where it could all work?
Yeah, that's a great question because I think I went on a strange journey. I I went into university being a person who liked to make all the things and be a part of it from the beginning, and a person who devises theater. And then when I was in university, I went to a program that was very much a conservatory acting program. So, we did Shakespeare, we learned about period drama, it ran the gamut. And it really was a program that taught you how to be an actor that could go out and be cast in Midsummer Night's Dream, or, it was geared toward training you to be a classical actor. And even when I was at university, was pushing against that. I wrote a one-person show as one of my classes. My friends and I put on a production of the Vagina Monologues to like raise money for an organization and like produce the whole thing because that's just who I am. But because I was at that, in that program, I started to then go, oh, I have to now be this other. I'm an actor now. And I went through a little bit of time at the beginning of my time outside of university, like right after I graduated, where I tried that. Like I tried to just be the person who goes to the audition and is an actor and does all the acty things, and was not very satisfying, nor was it very fruitful. Like I don't think I was showing up my best because I was trying to fit myself into a lane that was too constricting for me. And all the work I started getting was new Canadian plays by interesting new playwrights, festival shows where all my other skills like dance and music came into play. I was not really doing the work that I thought I was, supposed to do. I wasn't booking that work. Then I took a class. There was a real like turning point in my career where, well, first I was in a really bad car accident and I had to wear a cast for like 4 months, and I was housebound in Woodbridge. I hadn't moved out yet. I had moved back home, and I kind of couldn't do much. And that was like the biggest motivation of like, I'm getting out of here. Like as soon as this cast comes off, and I'm going after everything I want to go after because this is torture. Then there was a moment where I was going to take a class. I was taking all these classes, and I was going to either take this Second City class, because Second City is a big deal in Toronto as well as in Chicago. It's like Toronto's like the second sort of home, and SCTV and a lot of famous Canadian comedians, come from that. So I could either take this Second City class or this like clown class called it's a type of clown called Bouffon. I could take this Bouffon class with this,
Okay.
yeah, with this guy Adam, who I had gone to see his show, and he plays this sort of grotesque character. Because Buffon's kind of like, the beginnings of satire. It's like a French physical theater form
Okay.
where you dress up like a grotesque person, and you perform a kind of satire to get the audience laughing with you, but really you're making them laugh at themselves. It's like you're dressed like a person, a peasant, and you're trying to make the king laugh at himself. That's the kind of lore of it. And so I go see this
Sure.
weirdo show that I adored, of this like solo show of this guy. And I thought, I don't know who this guy is, but this is so wacky and fantastic. And he was doing a 2-week workshop. And my agent was like, you should take that Second City course because that'll look good on your resume and like it'll help your career. And I was like, nah, I'm gonna go take this weird clown course. Like I totally was like, I just gotta want to do
Sure.
this weird thing this guy's doing where it's so irreverent and it's so, I mean, it's sort of the seeds of what Stephen Colbert did on the Colbert Report. It's like that would be called like neo Buffon,
Interesting.
where he disguises
Mm.
himself as a kind of conservative, like extreme kind of pundit to expose, the absurdity of some of it. So anyway, I started
Right.
doing
Right.
that, and that opened up my entire creative being. And then I started creating characters and creating shows. And when I was doing that, then I started making videos to go along with those shows. And at the same time, I got a job working in post production in lifestyle television, because I needed a job. And so while I did that job, I learned how to use Final Cut, which at the time was what everyone was using. And I started taking
Yeah.
screenwriting courses, and I just kind of taught myself how to edit, because I was digitizing footage. And then they hired me to be a story editor,
Sure.
which then meant I got to learn how to assemble a story from just all these bits and pieces, which was really helpful as I was learning how to write screenplays. So all of that stuff strangely dovetailed into me making videos and filming things. I think though, when I look back, I was obsessed with those musicals in large part because of the scope of them. What I love about those MGM
Sure.
musicals is like the crane shots and the dollies and the sweeping, the technicolor. And I think
Mm-hmm.
the size of it was so exciting to me. And I always was sort of thinking in those contexts or terms. It just took, it took a like weebly wobbly path to get there.
Two things. One, I love the very poetic, artistic vision of you back at home and in a physical cast, right? And
Yeah.
we all know you have parts of your body that you don't pay attention to at all until they're hurt. Like you get a cut on like the outside ring of your middle finger, and suddenly it's the only thing that you can focus on, right? I love this idea of you back at home physically unable to do anything, and then it's like, okay, once this physical restriction is gone, I'm going to do these other things. And then as far as the scope goes in Fosse, I recently watched Sweet Charity for the first
Mm-hmm.
time. It's a remake of Knights of Cabiria, and I didn't know that going into it, but I was just I was so touched by how Fosse brought scope and grandness to this, like, and I don't say this in any type of negative way.
Mm-hmm.
Like he brought grandness and scope to this little lady,
Yep.
to this one person. And I wasn't in tears, but my favorite part of that film is when Charity is marching down the road in New York City, and this whole block, 2 or 3 blocks are shut down, and you see all this grandness around her, and then there's just her, and she's dancing. It's like it's not super choreographed, and you just see like the beauty of this one person, and the world stops. Like Fosse makes the world stop for this one person, and we focus on her, and it's just like, oh, it's so it's so amazing. So yeah, I'm right. And then obviously the numbers with the tight choreography and the feathers and the
Yeah. All the
lights and all that stuff.
spectacle. Yeah,
It's
the
amazing.
spectacle. He knows how to do the
Yeah.
spectacle. What I've always loved about Bob Fosse is like his ability to, it's like, to me, it's like this tightening of an elastic of like, because you're at the same time, you're going so into a subject matter or into a person's thought process of what they're feeling, and you're getting this kind of context and scope around them. I felt like he was so good at doing that. I mean, Cabaret is a kind of masterclass in that, but I mean, All That Jazz, which is one of my all-time favorite movies, is like, to me,
It's
a
amazing.
great example of that, of like the scope,
Yeah.
and also the minutia and the like tiniest thing. Even just that scene where they're reading the script for the new show, and they cut all the audio and everyone's laughing and he's like gonna have a heart attack, and it's so
Yeah.
masterful.
If you are a creative person sitting with Fosse's stuff, which someone might be able to correct me, but the majority of the stuff is tinged with creativity, like telling the story of different creative people, Cabaret and Lenny and Sweet Charity, even
Yeah.
all coming together and all that jazz. Anyway, if you're a creative person out there and you have not experienced his films, it's a must. I think it's an absolute must. So I want to ask you about the mother of all shows. How did this kind of come about? And you don't need to get too crazy personal, but if you've seen the film, as I have, this is incredibly dark. And I promise I'll stop talking now and I'll actually let you answer a question. But I was so taken by the darkness in the movie. And my wife was sitting next to me. She was working and she could hear some of the dialogue. And she was like, "What are you watching?" So I explained it. And she was like, "That seems really, I haven't watched it, but just from what I've picked up, this seems very, very intense." And I looked at her and I was like, "This is much more intense than I thought that it was going to be," in a great way, by the way. I really enjoyed it. I thought there was incredibly smart, interesting things, interesting ways of doing things. So back to the original question. One, how did this kind of all come about? And then two, and again, you don't have to get crazy personal, but like, how autobiographical is this for you?
Yeah, well, thank you for saying all of that. And I mean, so the way it came about was I had an idea over a decade ago about a film where somebody gets trapped in a 70s variety show in their head, where like it was like a story about a girl a woman in her 30s who hated her job. She worked at like a greeting card company or something. It was a very like different concept in that way, but everyone in her office is in the variety show and they all get stuck there. It was more like a mass hysteria sci-fi kind of project at the time. And so I wrote a treatment for that, for this funding contest. So in Canada, there's avenues of getting public funding or public adjacent funding. And so one of them was like, if you send in the treatment, you may win money to make a short film or something. So I was like, this is the perfect opportunity for me to do this. I did that. I submitted it. I didn't win. And then I just had this treatment. And my colleague, David James Brock, who is playwright and an opera librettist who I had met through doing theater in Toronto, and we had become very good friends. He was story editing a different screenplay of mine about this mob of middle-aged women in the suburbs. And I had written this kind of like mob comedy, and he was story editing that. And then I said, "Hey, can you take a look at this? I have a desire to go back to this concept. Can you look at it?" And he noticed that there was one scene where the daughter drops her mother off to go into palliative care at the beginning of the movie. And he was like, "This is an interesting scene. Why does this mother only show up here?" And I hadn't really even clocked the signal. Like it was, it's one of those things where when you're writing something, it takes somebody else sometimes to go, "Hey, there's this thing here that feels like that's what you're really writing about." And at the time, I was at the beginnings of going like what we would call low contact, if you will, with my mom. Like I was starting to not be in touch with her as much. This was just before the pandemic shut down. And so we started developing it with the idea of making it into a theater piece. So David and I started jamming out ideas about how we would put this on stage. And then the pandemic happened, everything got shut down, and through some weird turns of events, if you will, or however you pluralize that, my company, Highball TV, was suddenly in a position to make movies because my husband, Matt Campagna, has made a lot of films and projects on green screen and blue screen, and he's done a lot of visual effects himself. And so there was a group of financiers who wanted to get a movie into production, but nobody was making movies because it was unsafe to be in large numbers gathered shooting, and there were no vaccines yet, and there was very little testing. So Matt had a script, a post-apocalyptic Western script that was able to be shot one person at a time, and then with like a 4-person crew, and then composited in post. And so these people were like, this is great, let's try it. And so we made that, and then we made another one. And as it looked like we were in a position now to make films, oddly, at that time, I said to David, well, it sort of feels like there's a cinematic scope to this piece. Do we want to try and write it as a screenplay? So then it was just me and David in my backyard at the time in Toronto, like socially distanced, basically talking about how we both love variety shows so much and grew up watching them. So we would be like, what are all the segments we like, types of segments, and what are the emotional beats of what might happen to this character, and what would we use to explore it? And it was sort of just bouncing ideas and then pitching each other scenes. Like he would show up and he did that whole opening monologue that he had written a pass at and like performed it for me in the backyard, and it was very satisfying and just sort of fell into place. And I felt very compelled to write it and to make the movie. It is inspired by my own life. It is not autobiographical. A lot of it is fictional. I'd say most of it is a fiction. The characters are amalgamations of, people, both fictitious and real, like Rosa, the mother character. Some of what she does did happen in my household, and other things are things I heard about Debbie Reynolds or Judy Garland or other people that I know. So it was actually very freeing to make a piece about trauma in my own life and make it fictional and put it way over there so that I could separate myself from it. It was actually like very therapeutic and cathartic. That wasn't the point of making it, but it was a lovely side outcome. Mostly I wanted to make a movie that was more ambivalent about the relationship between mother and daughter, and that where there wasn't an expectation that they would reconcile, and where they are just sort of at an impasse, and it's okay that they're at an impasse. There's a lot of feelings about it, but that's just how it is, because I grew up watching so many movies where, like, in the last 20 minutes, the daughter does whatever she has to do so that the relationship's okay. Or it was really hard to see my own relationship with my mother in the media I was consuming. So it felt important to explore it.
Yeah, and I don't want to go into very strict details, because I think that if you're listening to this, you need to check out this film, and how things unfold is quite important. But there are a few things, obviously it's a variety show, and so there's this whole idea of the duet between the mother and daughter. I love how that develops and unfolds. For me, so much of what works about this, you said it's very therapeutic, but you didn't necessarily set out to do that. Hearing the whole backstory of how this came to be makes perfect sense. After you see the film, yes, all of that is in there, and great. Sometimes when we watch a story about traumatic relationships, it's hard to relate because the performances are something that we can't do. I can't be like Timothée Chalamet in Beautiful Boy. You know what I'm saying? I can see that and I can feel pain. And I know that that's a true story, and I'm not trying to like make fun of that or anything. But I think sometimes we don't see ourselves on screen because the acting is to a degree that has left common language and common conversation. And in Mother of All Shows, the best biting stuff is some of the dialogue and just some of the lines. They're so incredibly relatable. And because of the nature of the film, right? It's taking place on a variety show. Yes, we're doing, we're like grandstanding to an audience that may or may not exist, which I thought was also quite interesting. But it's like simple little lines of dialogue that transform Mother of All Shows from, okay, wow, somebody was really like working through their personal problems here, and now we all have to sit and experience it or sit and witness it, to, oh my God, I have thought that, or I have felt that. One of my favorite lines is when someone makes a comment about the weight of the daughter, and it said, oh, even cool Uncle so-and-so, and you thought that he was different. And it's said just like that. And obviously film is like a visual medium, right? And we love that. And sometimes there's things that are communicated non-verbally. Because in the film, the audience exists, right? The audience is being spoken to by the different characters. They're laying things out plainly for the audience in the film, which then translates to us as the audience watching the film. And it's great. It's amazing. And it's just, there were so many daggers in my heart by the end of it.
Yeah.
And I mean that as a compliment. Like I really think for anyone who has dealt with any of these issues, whether it be body image issues or pressure from parents, the whole idea of the mother asking, what are you eating? Even though she knows, that idea of a parent trying to put like a thorn in your mind it's incredibly relatable and wonderful. And me as a child to parents, and also as a parent to a child,
Yep.
it's painful, but not unrelatable, and not like so dramatic where I've lost it,
Right. Well, I'm relieved to hear, and I appreciate you saying that about the nature of it being relatable. And like, that was a really important part of our work, both David and I writing it, but also all the way through to the edit of like, I think that stories that come from our lives and people writing about their own situations and trauma is really fruitful stuff creatively. But I do think I didn't want it to become group therapy like via film. I wanted it to just make people consider and feel what it's like to be stuck in a place in your mind where this is playing all the time. It really was also for me to explore the idea of maladaptive daydreaming and like the fantasy worlds I built growing up. Part of why I loved movies and sitcoms, like part of the dialogue thing for me was also like an obsession with sitcoms and talking and how people speak to one another and what they're not saying with all the things they're saying. Like that was all really important for me because I was like, I made up so many fantasy worlds in my mind that I would get lost in because they were safer for me. They felt safer than being in the present moment in my house when there was conflict. So I was interested in what that's like. And when my dad at one point was potentially going into palliative care, and I decided to go see him, even though I wasn't in touch with my mom, which kind of cut me off from my dad, sadly. And I did have that kind of panic attack. Like as I was walking to see him, I was like, oh no, what's this going to be like? And I think one of my coping mechanisms had always been to imagine something else and fantasize about something else and have a safe place in my brain. And I thought a film felt like a cool way to explore, because I love when a movie can explore. I know you on the podcast you guys recently did Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, and I think like when a film can explore such an internal experience in an outward visual way is always so exciting to me. So it was those kinds of films were big inspirations in that regard.
I'll talk about this because it's in the first 5 minutes, right?
Okay.
So the film starts out, and we have a woman and a man in a car. They're talking, and I've seen this before, right? We've seen this before. We understand what's happening. And as she begins to walk and the camera is moving with her, we start to see elements of what will come into play later. And my ears and eyes just perked up, and I was like, oh, what is this? And then there's some, and I don't know if I just wasn't paying enough attention or if this actually happens, but as the camera's moving, things are being added in like a cool, interesting way. And before you walk through the door for the first time, it's great. It's great. Like I was very, not just impressed, but like kind of knocked my feet out from under me, because you get locked into seeing something a certain way, and that transition period of her from the car into the building, it was so fun and well done and interesting. I love it when a movie tricks me or makes me feel not stupid, but that I thought I knew what I was watching, and then it's very quickly something different. So I really loved that. And I'm a little bit younger, and so variety shows for me weren't that big of a thing. I remember watching like the Sonny and Cher show.
Yeah, a
on
classic.
Nick at Night as a very young person.
Yeah.
But I loved this. I loved the format. This is such a high concept. There's a lot of different layers to everything. And so you can't just say, well, it's a movie about someone who's imagining a variety show, because that really doesn't tell you everything that's happening. Because like I said, there's the whole thing with the audience, and why is it done that way? Well, we could look at practical reasons why, right? But it still is put into the story through camera tricks. We could have pretended, that there was a 500 person audience there, and we could have done that, but it gets folded into every little detail of what's happening. And yeah, I really enjoy it. I wanted to ask you about Wendy Malick as Rosa. How did that kind of come about?
I mean, it was very serendipitous. We had spent a lot of time trying to figure out who could play that role. We had someone in mind when we wrote it, but that person sort of wasn't available anymore and had moved on. And then also once we had written more of the role, it sort of wasn't the right fit. The actor was like, I don't know that this is quite for me anymore because of the musical elements that had been added. And so
Sure.
we were trying to find the right fit, and we had a list of names, and our producer had met with Wendy about a different project a couple of years previous. And we were talking about, joking about knowing someone on the list. And he said, oh no, the only person I know on this list is Wendy Malick. And I went, wait a minute. Hold the phone. You have been holding out on us, because, Wendy Malick, both David and I were huge fans of hers. And I was such a fan of Dream On, the show she was on in the 90s on HBO. And Dream On came up a lot when we were writing the film, because it has a connected sort of premise where his subconscious thoughts are things he watched on TV growing up, and they would pop into clips from old movies and television shows. So I thought, oh my God, and also she was on BoJack Horseman and played BoJack's mom, like voiced BoJack's mom. And I'm a huge fan of that show, and so many reasons why she was such a great choice. But of course I thought, I was like, okay, yeah, sure. Let's ask her. At that point, you're sort of swinging for the fences, and you're thinking, there's a million reasons why these things don't work out. So, that's why you have the list, and that's why you have all of the contingencies in place. And so she read it and she loved it, and her people said she really loves it. And then the negotiation started, and I figured, well, at some point this is going to break down. Like, it won't be enough money, or
Sure.
There'll be an immigration issue where she can't get here, or, it's COVID and like SAG and ACTRA have different COVID like I am a person who will always think gonna be a way this doesn't work, which is why it's really good that my husband is a person who's like, for sure it's gonna work out, because we meet in the middle and it's good. Because I was like, it just felt like too much to dream of. And then, they were like, nope, she said yes to that, and nope, that's fine, and no, that's fine. And then suddenly she's calling me and I'm having this amazing conversation with her about BoJack Horseman and about Dream On and about her time in the theater. I didn't know she came from the theater, and she was so excited to come and do this with us. And she was like, this is like going away and doing the play. And I was like, yep, it is exactly like that. We will be in a theater, and it was COVID, so we were sequestered pretty much together. And she just was so excited to dive in. And then she showed up and was as kind and generous as she is talented and funny. And she lit the place up with her personality and her talent, and was just a joy to work with. And we got along really well and have stayed in touch. And she's remarkable. And I knew she was such a great comedic actress. I had no,
Yes.
there was no question to me. And watching her and playing in a scene opposite her was thrilling for me, and being able to use all of those of my own chops against her was in those scenes where we get to spar, it was so exciting. But she's also a beautiful dramatic actor, and just brought so much depth to this character, who could have been played in a much more arch,
Sure.
mean way. Not to say that there aren't moments where she is very good at being mean. I think
Yes.
you can really see something beyond that, which is really important for that character, because it was also really important that this wasn't a movie where it was simply like, this woman's a villain and this woman, and her daughter is a victim, and it's not that clear. It's complicated by so much, and they both do things that are mean to one another, and they both push each other's buttons, and there's complication to it. And she understood that. She's just brilliant, and I still can't believe it happened. I'm just sort of like, yeah, that's right. Wendy Malick is in this movie, and amazing, and I'm very, very grateful.
She's awesome in it, and she brings this just like believability. She just exudes that energy of a talk show host, of a multi-talented person who can do a little singing and do a little comedy, and it's great. It sells to me, like, her being the focal point of all of the different transitions and scenes. Obviously everybody else there is great. I love the dude who's playing multiple characters
Oh yeah,
throughout
Juan,
it,
yeah.
including like a hot priest, and yeah. But much like a variety show or a talk show where the host is kind of the focal point and then everyone moves around them in different capacities, she was awesome, like really, really great.
Yeah, talk about a career that has spanned so many genres, and film and TV and animation and voice. She's amazing.
So you're directing this feature, you've got Wendy Malick, and in addition to that, you are also performing. You've got a cast and crew. I would be very nervous, and not that you should have been, and not that you were, but kind of what we were talking about earlier, how you were saying, you knew that you liked to be involved in things, helping make decisions, helping to make things. But as the director, you're now telling your cast and crew, I can direct myself also in acting. How do you do that? Because I would have jumped ship. I could not have done that. My hat is off to you.
Thank you. I didn't write it thinking I was going to play it. And I resisted it for a while, because I was anxious about, as you say, like wearing all those hats. But also, like, there was a part of me that was like, oh, is this going to seem like, how's this going to look to everybody? Because I come from a culture where everybody's very concerned about how it looks to everybody. And I was like, I don't want people to think that this is, as we said earlier, like just like Melissa does group therapy and pays
Yes.
a bunch of people to film it. I didn't want it to be that.
And it's not. Like, I just want to say
Thank
that.
you. Thank you. Thank you.
It's not that. It's not that at all. This is, yeah.
I appreciate that. Yeah, I was holding back on saying yes to doing it, and then my co-writer, my writing partner David, was like, "Oh, I just always figured you would play it." He didn't have that same thought pattern. And my husband, who was going to be co-directing it so that I could eventually, when I decided to play it, that was part of what made it possible, was knowing that he was holding on to the vision of it and making sure in those days where I couldn't do so much watching of playback or stuff like that, I trusted that he was getting what we had talked about. But he was like, I don't know why you wouldn't. And it was actually, I brought it up in my therapy session. So I was like, I don't know, feel like I don't think I should. And she was like, my therapist can be very matter of fact sometimes. And she said, so you have this part, it's like slightly based on your life. It's written with all your gifts in mind, and you want someone else to play it. And she just asked the question and let it hang in the air.
Right.
And I went, I hear what you're saying. And then Matt was like, also, we shot this in 20 days. He was like, it's going to be, we shot it in 20 days. Like every different set was basically a day. Like every different sketch was pretty much a day of shooting. Yeah. And so he was like, it's gonna be a lot harder if you have to go explain to somebody what you want from them instead of just doing what you want from the character. And I said, oh yeah, that is also true. Right. So ultimately, all of that hemming and hawing, when I look back, and not to dismiss it, I mean, I had to go through that process, but I think that I was just nervous also to be in those situations that were reminiscent of things that had happened to me, or a kernel of them at least, and be able to do that. And also, as you say, like give people on the crew and the cast the confidence that they're being led and that there's somebody at the helm who's thinking about them and considering them and keeping all of those moving parts in mind. I have to say that I think it was easier for me to direct in some ways and act because I was doing the other. Like there was actually something very organic about that for me. And we had so much prep. Like I prepped each part of my job separately, quite extensively. Like I worked with my friend Adam, that guy, that clown that I went to take that class with. We have continued to make art together for decades. And so I hired him to go through the script with me and work on it like an actor, as though I hadn't written it. And so he and I came up with a strategy so that I didn't have to worry about the acting part because I had all the ways I needed to get into it so that I could focus on that when I had to. And likewise, Matt and I meticulously locked it and storyboarded it and created all the pieces. So all that preparation meant that when I had to click into another zone, I had people supporting me and we had a roadmap and I could rely on it. It was very satisfying. I don't know if this is like a neurodivergence thing, but I like to load myself up. Like I respond well to like having things to challenge me in multiple ways. Like, sure. I need sometimes that almost too much, like it's almost too much, but just back it off a tiny bit.
Right. Yeah, I understand. It's definitely not the healthiest way to be.
No.
But I think a lot of creative people can kind of understand. It's like you almost force yourself to act because there's too many things. And if you wake up and you look at your schedule for the day and you're like, I have one thing to do today, you might put that off. If it's due by 5, you'll be done at 4:59. Where if you have like 20 things to do, that you can't sit around and wait around. And it's not great, but
no, I find that like I need the pendulum of like that, and then I need at least a day a week where I am not expected to be anywhere and I can just take the day as it comes and it doesn't matter what time I do anything. Like that's the only way, that's my balance, is like I needed enough days where where it's nothing, to balance it out. Yeah.
The idea of, like a 9 to 5, that seems like a death sentence to
Yeah.
us.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's like, what are you talking about? No.
It does. I feel like I could not have the kind of routine that
Yeah.
I could not have a 9 to 5. Yeah. Like this morning I woke up and there were so many things I could have done, and we're working on a new project now, and there were some vocal tracks that I could lay into an animatic if I edited them together. And I was like, I just want to do this. And I was like in heaven, hyper focused on that task and like using 5 different skills at the same time to make something. Yeah. I'm like, that's my happy place. It's like when those different talents and skills can be used at the same time to bring something together is like, yeah, that's the flow state.
You're an interesting character, directing, writing, acting in it. I'm always impressed when someone can direct and act in the same thing. One thing I wanted to ask you about is Highball TV, where that all came about and what you guys do with that, how that works.
Yeah. Well, it came about because in Canada, as I said earlier, there's different funds. There's private funds that use public money. There's public funds that use public money. There's public funds that use, like, there's a lot of different funding options, which can be great and is a good thing. I think there should be public funding for art and film. So I'm a big advocate of that. We had made like a digital series, 3 10-minute episodes of this series called Tactical Girls. And it had gone to some festivals. I had won an award. We have these things called the Canadian Screen Awards, which are like the Oscars and the Emmys together. And so I had won one for my performance in that. And so we wanted to make a second season and make it a bit longer. And we had pitched it. There were sort of 2 broadcasters at the time in Canada you could pitch it to. And they enjoyed it. We got good feedback, but they didn't want to pick it up. And so we were going to apply for this fund. In order to get the money, you have to have a broadcaster attached. Well, there's 2 broadcasters. So we were like, what are we going to do? And so Matt, we were talking to our business affairs associate and friend, and we were looking at all these sites that were applying to the body that regulates broadcasting in Canada to be considered digital broadcasters. And this was in 2016, 2017. And so that was everything from like YouTube channels that were wanting to be called Canadian broadcast channels to white label like Vimeo, VHX sites and stuff like that. And so Matt saw them and said, oh, I can build that, because Matt had done a lot of coding. He had been putting videos up on the internet before YouTube existed. So he was like, we could just build a site, get it approved by this governing body, and we'll be our own broadcaster. So we always joke that it was easier to build a streaming service than get a broadcaster on board for our series in Canada, because it weirdly was. So we built this site, and then we started trying to acquire different films and series for it. And we started to talk to a lot of people who were in really bad distribution deals, because distribution now is even more of a nightmare, mystery, enigma, puzzle than ever before. But even back then, there were people who were locked into 25-year distribution deals with a Canadian distributor, and they couldn't find their movie anywhere. That like the movie was just like, people were like, I want to see your movie. Where can I see it? And there was nowhere to see it. And so we started then acquiring things and almost like filling out people's distribution. So if they had a US deal, but they never got a Canadian deal, we're like, well, you can have it up in Canada on Highball, and at least people in Canada can watch it. And so we started to do that. And then we brought on, after a couple of years of Matt and I basically just programming the whole site, like watching the movies and doing all of that programming for it, we brought on a curator that I worked with at TIFF. I used to work at the Toronto International Film Festival, and I worked with this great programmer named Neil McPherson. And so we hired him, and he started building collections. And then we started reaching out beyond just filmmakers. I mean, it started out with just like dealing directly with filmmakers, and then it grew to dealing with distribution companies and sales agents and all of that. So it grew and it grew. And then the pandemic happened, and then we started making originals. And now I think we've made 12 original films, and they're all slowly being released.
Wow.
Yeah. It's a wild ride.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
So for either of you, and don't take this the wrong way or anything like that. But for both of you, you're artists who have now kind of become like the man, you know, like
Yeah, a little bit.
we live in such a strange time with streaming, and it seems like no one knows what's happening. No one knows what anyone is doing. I think HBO just announced that 2 series that were going to come to Max are now going to play on HBO and then come to Max at a later time. Disney put their hand into it and dumped all this stuff in, and they're like, well, maybe we're going to back off from that now. And so when I say, you know, you guys became the man, I don't mean it in a negative way, but like, it's so interesting how people who are making things for themselves and outside of Warner Brothers and Universal Pictures, you guys have to kind of create a place, but then in doing so, you're now helping other people. Like, I long for a revolution in Hollywood and filmmaking. I say take down these systems that you have to jump through a million hoops in order to get something made, and it's a dream. And for people who are like, I'm going to make a movie, and if I need to, I'm going to make a streaming service. I'm going to make that too.
Yeah. I mean, I think Matt and I say it a lot, but we are both the same kind of relentless. Like, I should say the same kind. We're both relentless and we have our own ways that we push against things. But if you tell me no, I will find every way I can. Like, no is just not a thing for me if it's something I care about. And part of that is like growing up in an environment where like I didn't feel very seen or understood, and I was like, I have to push against this, I have to push against this, I have to. And I think that relentlessness has been very useful. All of a lot of my idols or people that I looked up to, you know, Barbara Streisand, like, did all of it and, you know, had to become very savvy about the producing side of things. Lucille Ball, I mean, so many women that I look up to in this industry were people who they had to learn how to be in business as well as be artists. And for a long time, I shied away from my entrepreneurial spirit, or I thought, I can't, if I'm a business person or I'm a boss, then I can't, it sullies the kind of artist in me. And like, there are days when I really struggle right now, because on the one hand, there's the artist part of me, and there's the part of me that wants certain things to change in a certain way. And then there's the business part of me that goes, yeah, but if we're going to change things, we have to do it with some business minded ways. Like, we can't just, the revolution cannot just happen. It has to happen in both places. It can't just happen artistically and from the outside of the system. It has to come from inside the system too. And that requires some of us who have the brains that can do both things. Because not everybody, there are people who really are not suited to the math, and in Canada to like the tax credits and the kind of the whole, you know, mess of what that is. And that's fine. And then there are people who are very good at that and who are not good at the other part. But then there are some people who I think they can do both. And I think Matt and I both like both. Like, we drive back and forth from Toronto to our farm, and we listen to all these audiobooks that are like audiobooks about CEOs. We listen to Disney Wars. We listen to the one about, you know, Marvel. We listen to the one about DreamWorks. We listen to the Paramount one. Like, you know, it's like fascinating to us. And I think both the art that they talk about is fascinating, and the movies and what got made and how they made it, and how they revolutionized home video to maximize their company's ability to make things. Like, and so I'm learning more and more to embrace the fact that I like to live in both worlds in a way. It's hard though, because like, I don't, you know, Matt and I at one point were like, how do we not become assholes? Like, and how do we not exploit people? And how do we, what does it look like? How does it need to be rebuilt? Because I really do think that some of the structures just simply do not work anymore. They do, the way that we look at it, the way that it's not functioning. And so it needs to
Mm-hmm.
change. What could that look like? And how do we help be a part of that in our own way? I think one of the biggest things is like, it's a really hard time right now if you're a specialist. If you're like just a writer, and I don't mean just in a diminutive, like a diminished way. I mean, if you
Yeah,
focus
yeah.
on
Mm-hmm.
writing, if you've built a career, which is an incredible thing to do, if you've built a career being a cinematographer, if you've built a career doing these, I think it's really tough right now because of how everything has shifted and the power balance is
Mm-hmm.
so messed up. So in a way, being
Yeah.
able to do multiple things has allowed us to carve out a different path. I think the thing I always encourage people to do is if there are other parts of the industry they're excited about, learn about them and get good at doing them, because that's a plus, not a minus. I used to think it was a minus, and now I see
Yeah.
that it can be a plus.
Yeah, absolutely. I love, French New Wave and the idea of a group of people who love movies and just decide to make them. And
Yeah,
by doing so, literally reinvent film and how it's seen. Like they're inventing new ways of doing things because of limitations and because they're just like, no one's telling us what to do other than us. And so we're just going to do it.
yeah,
And it is impossible nowadays to try to go through the same system that has been around since the 1910s and 1920s, and all of us who are fans of film and film history know is corrupt and held by very few people make all the decisions as to who gets to make movies, what movies we see. And there's been such a long and loud conversation that seems to just be at a standstill now of,
yeah,
well, who gets to be on screen, right? And what percentage of what groups of people are we going to not require because we want to, but require because it will make us look better. And now even some studios are falling back on representation. And to me, again, if you want to make a movie, go and make it. And if you have to make a streaming service to put it out there, put it out there.
yeah.
And
Go and make it.
I
Yeah,
think, yeah, I think if creative people will kind of dash the idea of putting your hands in cement outside of the Chinese theater, if that's if you can, do away with that, if that is no longer your goal, then you can, take control of your life and you can make something and people will see it and you'll still get to be creative. And I agree 100% too with what you were saying about, the reason why we are where we are is because artists are not good business people, because they're told that they don't need to be. They're told that that's boring, or you don't need to know how any of that stuff works. And so you leave all the business to the business people who are not creative at all.
nope.
And then before you know it, they've made all these rules. So it's like, well, wait, what do you mean I can't do X, Y, and Z? It's like, well, yeah, you need to follow this set order of things.
Yeah. And it's weird to me because there's so much creativity in business, in like setting up the structure of how you make art. It actually needs creativity. It needs ingenuity. It needs, I used to always joke when we worked in
Mm-hmm.
theater, we would always joke like, because people would always say like, oh, don't give artists don't know what to do with money. And I was like, give a theater producer the budget of a like community to manage, and you'll get a heck of a lot out of that budget, because they know how
Absolutely.
to work with very little and create magic out of nothing. And so I think
Yeah.
it's so strange to me that we've become a world where these things are so separate, and one of them has all this creativity and passion and drive, and the other one is completely devoid of it and only cares about, you know, shareholders and profits and this whole other kind of
Yeah.
divorced thing. Certainly in Canada, part of the thing for us too was that there were very few people deciding what kinds of movies got made, and the movies were all made kind of in the same
Yeah.
budget range within the same system. And so even if they were different genres, they kind of felt the same because they all had the same kind of scope and the same practices. And a lot of the films we've made run the gamut from, you know, post-apocalyptic Western to psychological thriller to, you know, crime comedy to a documentary about a music station, like radio station. It's like these were projects that other Canadian funding bodies weren't going to make because they didn't see how they could make them in that system, and they didn't know where the market was for them. And I think, you know, what we wanted was Canadians like to make movies about all kinds of things. And so why don't we just let them make the movies they want to make and call those Canadian stories and not be super invested in what we consider, quote unquote, a Canadian story. There's so much kind of steeped in that idea in Canada. And so for us, it was like the business practices side of things and trying to shake up what was happening from a financing standpoint and from a release standpoint, and also being Canadian and going, I want to make musicals. I want to make high concept musicals about feelings.
Right.
Nobody's going to give me money to do that unless I build the mechanism by which I can do it. And so, yeah, there's excitement for me because to me, they're the same. Building the film and building the structure that holds the film have the same kind of energy. And I think they should. I think that's part of what's missing.
Right. Yeah. And when you allow, like I said, when you give up who owns movie theaters, right? When only major corporations own movie theaters, well, then they are answering to stockholders, and they're putting out the movies that they believe are going to make money. And when very few people are running studios in business, you work with people that you know, right? And so when the same type of person is running all of the businesses, and they want to work with their friends and the people they're familiar with and people they can count on, it leaves out like so many people. And so artists have, in a way, like just forsaken the vessel through which their art is delivered. And we're seeing how bad that is. You know, it's taken a while for it to all kind of come crumbling down, and people will lament, you know, the end of the film industry and the end of movie theaters. That will never happen. It will never, ever happen. If a camera exists on planet Earth, someone will make a film. And if there are no movie theaters, they will show it in a church basement. You know, they will show it on the side of a building. Things will continue. They might not continue the way that they have been. And I don't think that they should, quite frankly. But
I agree.
Yeah, artists need to take back the business.
Agreed. 100%. Yes. And like humans will always need to express themselves, and we will always need to connect with each other. And the way we do that is through our stories. And so there will never be, you cannot stop that. That is an ever-present force. So I agree. And let's take it back, burn what we have to the ground. And I think we really have to reimagine it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, hey, Melissa, thank you very much. I appreciate all your time. Definitely, if you haven't already, you need to check out Mother of All Shows. So I know that you like to pile stuff on before you do anything. What do you got going on next?
We're in production on an animated film right now that's a hybrid of like drawn animation and rotoscoped live action capture. So, and there's music in it. And so we just did some recording. So I'm sort of putting together scratch tracks, and we're blocking out some stuff for that. We release Mother of All Shows imminently. So working on social media posts for that. And then we have a bunch of other films releasing this year, and it's just a lot of movies. I mean, I'm very lucky that the pile of stuff, generally speaking, is just making movies or helping other people make their movies. So I can't complain. It's a pretty dreamy life.
Amazing. Well, I'm very happy for you, and I look forward to whatever's coming next.
Thanks, Seth. I really your Twitter presence, and you're always like a really nice part of my day. It's like you really are. Like it's great. The questions you pose and the way you talk about movies is really fun, and I like participating, and I really appreciate you watching the film. It means a lot to me. So Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you very much to Melissa. And I hope that if you're interested in making films that you consider, I don't know, maybe making your own streaming service or make your own movie. Just do it. It'll be cool, and maybe one of your favorite actors will be in it. If you enjoy the show, we'd really like it if you would give us a rating and a review wherever you're listening. It helps us out a lot, and I'm not just saying that because that's what everyone says. You can also send us an email, moviefriendspodcast@gmail.com. We would really love to hear from you. Also, if you're able, we would love it if you would consider supporting the show, patreon.com/moviefriendspodcast. We have a ton of bonus shows and episodes up there, and patrons get input into future episodes. So, get some control in your life. Thank you very much for listening. Until next time, have a good one.
Movie Friends is produced by Seth Vargas and Michelle Rubenstein. Music by Anthony Vicora. If you like the show, please subscribe and give us a rating. It really helps us find new friends. Thanks!